Pablo Emilio Escobar, kingpin, drug lord, and most famously, Wagner Moura lookalike. Born in 1949 in the city of Rio Negro, he eventually grew from his middle-class upbringing into one of the world's wealthiest men. And how did he manage to do that? Well, let's just say Mr. Escobar was very good at his job, moving tons and tons of illegal drugs across the world. But this video isn't about the history of Pablo Escobar or how he made his estimated $30 billion. We'll be looking at the incredibly decked out, frankly insane mansions he built with his illicit wealth. Welcome back to our channel. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a video from us. At the height of Pablo Escobar's drug operations, it was estimated that he was moving over 15 tons of cocaine into the United States every single day and made $810 a second. He was making so much money that getting high for Pablo didn't involve his own supply, but meant taking a ride in one of his many private jets. In fact, he loved getting high so much that he bought himself 15 private jets and 6 helicopters. So what sort of house would such a wealthy man with a penchant for lavish spending live in? The answer, several very super mansions around the Americas. One of such estates was the Hacienda Napoles, Spanish for Naples Estate. That was Pablo Escobar's luxurious estate built in Puerto Triunfo, Colombia. The estate covered an insane 7.7 square miles of land. That's even bigger than Disneyland Paris, just to live in. Getting the mail must have been a real pain, let me tell you. The estate included a Spanish colonial house, a sculpture park, and a zoo that housed exotic animals. I mean, why even build a house if you can't stop to feed the giraffe during your morning walk? There's also a bull ring, a kart racing track, and a private airport. Well, he did own 15 private jets, remember, and still had enough space to store his massive collection of vintage and luxury cars. However, following Pablo Escobar's death in 1993, many of the original buildings on the property were demolished or reconditioned for other purposes, and it's now being converted into a family-friendly theme park. I'm sure Pablo, the murdering drug lord and narco-terrorist, would be proud. Next on the list, we have Casa Malka. This was one of Pablo Escobar's seaside escapes, and what an escape it was. Beachfront property on one of Mexico's most sought-after beaches. During his trips to this seaside resort, Pablo wouldn't spend all of his time indoors though, which is a little surprising considering how beautifully designed and no doubt exquisitely furnished Casa Malka was. But taking a step on Tulum Beach is enough to understand just why Casa Malka was placed there in the first place. However, after Pablo Escobar's death in 1993, it was abandoned for almost 2 decades until it was discovered and purchased by Leo Malka, an art aficionado from New York in 2012. The end of the world wasn't about to stop him. After years of hard work, the doors of Casa Malka were opened once again, this time inviting guests from all over the world. It had been converted into a 5-star luxury art hotel. The Casa Malka might not be much like what it used to be, no longer the getaway mansion for a wealthy drug lord, now filled with art from artists like Keith Haring and Kenny Sharp, providing a wonderful escape for anyone lucky enough to be a guest within its walls. That wasn't Pablo's only getaway villa either. I mean, you've got to get one and a spare, right? That brings us to La Manuela. What was La Manuela, you ask? You know how once in a while you just want to get away from it all? Go to a serene location near the ocean and just relax? Well, Pablo Escobar felt the same way, so he decided to build a 20-acre lavish estate in the resort town of Guatape on the shores of Piñol Reservoir and named it after his daughter. Pablo was sure to give La Manuela the Escobar touch as well, decking out this estate with a massive pool, tennis courts, a helipad big enough to play football on, horse stables for when you want to ride nature and not just look at it, a seaplane dock, imported trees for when you got bored looking at regular trees, and guard towers because you weren't getting in there without his permission. As beautiful as La Manuela was, just 8 months before the death of Pablo Escobar, it fell to an enemy attack. 200 kilograms of TNT was stuffed into one of its bathrooms and detonated. Now, I'm no architect, but that sounds like enough TNT to blow a sizable chunk into any building. After that, La Manuela was abandoned and slowly reclaimed by nature. It's currently dilapidated and covered in plants. It's not all bad though. Pablo's personal discotheque was converted into a bar, and people are welcome to paintball in the ruins of La Manuela. Just be careful near the holes people made in it while looking for hidden cash. Next up is his big house, La Casa Grande. Inside the Caribbean on a tiny island called La Isla Grande, accessible only by special boat from Cartagena. Here on this island with a population of just over 1,000 lies one of Pablo Escobar's largest estates. The locals call it La Casa Grande, which is very accurate to say the least. At its height, La Casa Grande was so big that it had over 300 exquisitely furnished rooms with a solid gold shower head in every single bathroom. That's enough gold to make Egyptian billionaire Najib Sawiris jealous. That's one for the gold fans in the back. And as for La Casa Grande, what was once Pablo Escobar's premier party villa has long since been abandoned. Its splendid white walls are now dilapidated, its rooms overrun by plant life, life, there are no more speedboats docking at its pier and no more rowdy parties going deep into the night. All that's left of La Casa Grande is an empty husk of its former glory. That's because, unfortunately, La Casa Grande did not receive the Hacienda Napoles treatment and has continued to be left abandoned. You won't find any signs pointing to this massive villa. You won't even find it on Google Maps. And if Google Maps can't find you, do you even exist? Speaking of the big house, during his life, Pablo Escobar never wanted to wind up in prison, so he used his wealth and influence to convince local authorities to allow him to build his own prison. And remember, this is Pablo Escobar we're talking about, so of course, this wasn't your typical government-sanctioned self-built prison. That's how La Catedral, also referred to as Hotel Escobar, was born. This prison wasn't exactly built to keep Pablo in, but to keep enemies out. It was constructed on a foggy mountainside to prevent any attacks by air and was guarded by men Pablo specifically picked. And it wasn't called Hotel Escobar for nothing. This five-star prison was replete with every modern convenience Pablo could imagine and then some. It had a casino for gambling with the men he hired to guard him, a football field where he once had the Colombian national team play a game with him, and a spa, you know, for when you need to relax and unwind after a long day of being in prison. Pablo didn't let pretending to be in prison keep him away from the outside world. La Catedral was host to many guests and many parties were held in it. It had enough luxuriously furnished rooms to have guests sleep over. Plus the fact that he outfitted his prison with state-of-the-art communication devices, allowing him to run his drug empire from afar. Hotel Escobar was just a slightly more discreet version of any of his mansions. Ironically, La Catedral, the prison that once housed the most dangerous and powerful drug lord ever, has been converted into a monastery. Does that even count as ironic? It was already called the cathedral, or was it ironic before? Pablo Escobar was a man of incredible amounts of wealth, allowing him to acquire and build several properties in different countries, but not every one of them was a super mansion. For example, in Medellin, he had a completely less outrageous bit of property called the Monaco Building. It might not have been the size of a small theme park or a fortress in the mountains, but the Monaco Building was nothing to sneeze at. Trust me, living in this building in its heyday would have had you feeling pretty up there. And that's not just the cocaine residue. It was a gray 6-story tall building, very well furnished, and at the top of it sat a decked-out penthouse which Pablo saved for himself. The Monaco Building was occupied by Pablo Escobar for years until 1988 when it was bombed by a rival cartel. That usually makes an apartment a little difficult to live in, I've heard. It was then abandoned for decades, and after the death of Pablo, it became a tourist site. People would come to see where the famed drug lord had once lived. In 2018, it was demolished by city officials in an attempt to move past the painful history the building represented, and has since been turned into a memorial for the victims of Pablo Escobar. These grand mansions and villas don't come cheap. They were estimated to have been worth at least $500 million. That's over $1.1 billion by today's standards. Suffice it to say, accounting for all Pablo Escobar's many properties would place their worth well over $1 billion. And even though he's long gone now, some of his buildings still stand, reminding us of the legacy of the richest drug lord to ever live. What would you do if you had as much money as Pablo Escobar? Or should I say, how many mansions would you build? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave us a like. You can check out the King Luxury channel for more videos all about luxury. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.